Hey, watercolor class. So this exercise is about color mixing. So I'd like to go over the process of just mixing spectrum colors from the primaries. And then also we're going to do an additional exercise, which is to mix neutralized colors using two complementaries from the color wheel. And then finally a value scale, which you have already tried out just in trying to render a monochrome image of some kind. So I just wanted to go over a couple things first. Want to focus on the palette. So the palette over here you can see has already been laid out with color. It's got, it's basically laid out according to the rainbow, the spectrum colors. And then you can see there are lots of different types of reds and there are lots of different types of blues. And as one gets experienced working, you develop preference, and some colors are just around for security's sake, and other colors you rely on a lot. But you can make a good painting with one color. You can make a good painting with two colors. You can make a good painting with every color in the spectrum as long as you are able to orchestrate them okay. But I'm going to be working on this exercise first just limiting the color to three representatives of the three primaries, red, yellow, and blue, and then you start finding out that well, some colors are like one blue. There's no perfect blue that will do everything. There's no perfect yellow, and there's no perfect red. So you have to mix a color wheel using just three primaries. You have to just try to get the best combination of red, yellow, blue that you can. So I'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, so we've got basically, I've got some tubes of color here that represent the three primary colors, yellow, red, and blue. And then within that, basic group of primaries, there are different types. Obviously, you've seen the paint store, different types of colors that you're working with, different types of yellows, different types of reds and blues. So notice, for instance, there's generally cadmium red, or sometimes it's referred to, I'm sorry, cadmium yellow, sometimes referred to as lemon yellow, but it's kind of a lighter yellow. And then you have darker yellows. Sometimes these are referred to as gamboge or cadmium yellow deep. Then with the reds, you have these kind of warmer reds is sort of geared towards orange, and then cooler reds that are geared towards blues, or violets, I should say. Here's this cadmium red light, or also Grumbacher red. Those are kind of warmer reds. Then these more red violets. We've got a phthalo crimson here and a alizarin crimson. Those are kind of geared towards violet. And then in the blues, there are ultramarine blue and cobalt blue. Those are kind of very similar colors, and they are geared towards violets. And then finally, within the blues, got a phthalo blue, got a Prussian blue. Those tend to be geared more towards blue greens. So anyway, when you're mixing with trying to just use three colors to kind of make the spectrum, you kind of sort of orchestrate them so they give the best possible results. So in thinking about this exercise, I would say if you have it, get one of these lighter yellows, cadmium yellow, pale, or lemon yellow, that. And then when you're picking a red, go with the crimson. Go with the crimson, so either a phthalo crimson, that's the Grumbacher Academy series, or an alizarin crimson. That's a good one. Alizarin crimson is a really common color between all the manufacturers. Everybody makes an alizarin crimson. Because I don't have much alizarin crimson in the tube, I'm going to use a phthalo crimson. And you can kind of see, this is more purpley on the label, so you can kind of tell just by looking at it too. And then in the blues get really tricky, so many different types of blues. But I want to pick a blue that is maybe more towards the greenish end of the spectrum. You know, obviously if I mix like and I'm thinking about the whole, just trying to orchestrate like the best possible 12 color spectrum I can get with using only 3 primaries. I'm going to say choose a blue that is maybe more of the kind of blue-green aqua. So that would be a phthalo blue or a Prussian blue. So there are my 3 colors. So like very light yellow, kind of a red violet, and a little bit of a blue-green. And then I'm just going to, here are your 3 colors. Alizarin crimson works great here. So I know most everybody has an alizarin crimson. And then I'm going to take the other colors away and then work with these. Okay, just want to talk about this page. This is basically a 18 by 12 inch format. So if you had an 24 by 18 pad, you could just use half of a page and do this arrangement here. So the color wheel, you don't need to have a compass. You can just take a plate and trace off the image and then divide it into quadrants. You know, find the middle, and you maybe just a little sort of, if you're not using a compass, just a, you just kind of work at it until you kind of find a basic middle point. Nothing's going to happen if it's not perfect. Then you divide it into quadrants, and then divide each quadrant into 3 units, and that gives you your 12 color bands that you're going to use in this exercise. Then over here, we'll get to that in a little while, but basically you want something that is a grid of 1 square units that is 5 units wide and 6 units high. And then finally a value scale that you just want maybe, what do we got, 8? 8 is fine. That's all I could fit onto this page. So we're going to do a value scale just using 8 different gradations, and then you're good to go. Okay, back to a larger field of vision. So I've got my 3 paints, and then I have the palette nearby, ready to go, and then off screen is water. Consider changing your water frequently, because once it gets dirty, it's going to obviously influence your colors when you're going to try and meet them. And then the brush to do this exercise with is probably just a number 12 or 14 round, just all-purpose brush. You need to have some ability to be precise, but you don't want to have a tiny brush that won't allow you to hold much pigment. Okay, so the next thing, and a rag, of course, might be good to just keep it in your lap, or it's good for blotting your brush when you wash it, and then also testing, like testing your color on it if you want to, or you can test color on the margins of the paper. This is not an exercise that requires like super precision. Don't be intimidated by the process. I think more importantly, it's just, good to understand how it all works. So I'm going to take my 3 colors and lay them out on the palette. Crumbly paint there. So some yellow. You might even make like a couple little dots. If you have leftover color, you can always scoop it back up and put it into the little wells. And then I'm going to have put some reds over here. And some blues over here. Might even be good to separate them a little bit more. That. And then you just kind of, your oranges are going to be here, your violets are going to be here, your blue greens are going to be here, and then you just kind of mix. So what you're trying for in this exercise, we'll start with yellow up here. I would wet the little section that you're going to be working on first, and it's My brush has got a little bit of existing color in it. Wet it, not super wet, just wet enough because we're going to try to do like a color gradation within each little pie shape here. There are some of you who are perfectionist oriented and you're going to want to make the edges really, really super and straight. And then the only thing to be careful of as you're doing this is try to avoid, if you're working with wet colors, try to avoid letting one area touch another because then they'll just bleed into one another. So we'll start with our primary yellow and I'm just going to add the tiniest bit of red to it so that it's like a warmer yellow. And then what you want to do is saturate the color, the sort of brightest, most saturated aspect of it. That's what you're trying for. And then without it becoming opaque, you want it to really flow on. You want it to be really liquid and you want it to settle very naturally on your palette. As you work towards the middle, you can thin the color out. So just add increasingly more water. As you work towards the middle too, you'll have less paint on your brush, and so that should just kind of do that naturally. So in the middle, I want it to look very pale. On the outside, I want it to look really super saturated. And one thing to remember is when the colors go on, they look really vibrant, and then as they dry, then they kind of become less so. Oops. And you can always go back and kind of reactivate your color. Now yellow, you can't tell much what's going on because it's just a very light color. I just want to make sure it's transparent, and I want to make sure that it dries like a puddle, not where you see brush strokes, but where the water just kind of settles somewhat evenly. If it does dry, if sometimes it's super wet, and then it dries where you see these kind of granular edges, that's great. That's fine. That's not to be avoided in watercolor. Okay, so darker, more saturated to less saturated. Okay, so now I want to make a yellow orange. And so I want to draw a little bit from this red, a little bit more. And it still should look yellow. But it should look distinctly different than what's next to it. So still looks basically yellow. And I didn't wet my, I forgot to wet my surface first. So I guess there's no absolute rule on how to do this, but I'm working faster, so I just didn't do that. So that works that way too, if you want maybe slightly more control. All right, so I'm going to paint in this kind of pale area in the middle. And then I'm going to go back and try to get it more saturated on the outside, because I can tell, just experience tells me that the color isn't very saturated here. It just needs to be a lot more saturated. So I'm just trying to add in more pigment. And if you have just a puddle of liquid going, then it's easy just to kind of dab in color. And just practice trying to get it just to kind of like disperse as you're working on it. And when in doubt, add more pigment to it because invariably it's just going to dry and not be quite so saturated. Now, if we were to take a yellow orange, out of the tube, it's going to have more vibrancy to it. But in this case, we're trying to, get a little color theory going here. So we're mixing the colors instead, and we're limiting ourselves to just 3, which makes it even harder. Okay, so I just want that sense of it more saturated on the outside, less saturated on the inside. And that's how you get a very pale yellow, but then still kind of have a spectrum yellow, but it would just be pale as if you were adding white to it. Okay, now we're going to try orange. So a little more of this red color. And the orange should be, really right in the middle. Can't be red. Can't be red orange. It can't be yellow. So it can only be orange. And I have to keep mixing more paint. Keep pulling more paint into this little puddle I've got going. So these colors are all kind of like orchestrated, so that they sort of look like they are, like no one hue should stand out too much against the others because we're kind of mixing them all together in varying degrees. All right. So I feel like I got my orange pretty well saturated there. Clean my brush, a little more water on it. And I'm just going to kind of pull the color down here to the middle. And I'm leaving just little spaces in between the hues because I don't want to wait for them to dry, but I don't want them to bleed together. So here's my saturated, here's my less saturated, and I can go back in and dissolve it a little bit. I'm using my rag to kind of blot. Start to show up a little bit more when you get into the darker colors that you're saturated, desaturated. This is also known as tinting, as if you're adding white, but obviously we're not adding white, we're just diluting the paint mixture. Okay, so these are all pretty distinct from one another, so I think I'm doing all right. Now I want to try a red-orange. So in between each primary color, there's a secondary color and a tertiary color. So now I'm mixing the tertiary, which means it's like a primary and a secondary mixed together to make red-orange. Yeah, a little more yellow in it, maybe. Let's try that. Okay, red-orange. And the other thing too is you can go back and augment these later. You can, when they dry, you can, if they're not saturated enough, you can go back and do another kind of color glaze over the top of it to make it more saturated. Or you can also, in contrast, you can also, if it's like too opaque, like if you can't see any transparency, then you can go back and kind of the reactivate the color area and take color away. But you want to try to not overwork it too much, just keep it relatively fluid and don't just keep brushing over and over one particular area to try to get it right, because then the paper will break down and it'll start not looking so great. This doesn't have to be perfect. You're just trying to understand a concept here and trying to understand how colors operate with one another. And I'm just trying to add more pigment here because I feel like I'm just not quite saturated enough. And don't worry about getting little puddle marks as it's drying. That's fine. It looks kind of more appealing somehow. There will be those of you who want it to be perfectly smooth perfectly graduated, and that's okay too. But don't drive yourself insane trying to get that, and then sacrifice the, you know, sacrifice the beauty of just the, you know, liquid quality of the paint just to try to achieve the perfection. It's easier to do that with oil or acrylic. Okay, so I got saturated, kind of transitioning down into less saturated, and finally just really, really pale there. Okay, now my red, so primary yellow, primary red. Well, because I'm using a tube of red that's already kind of a red violet, I'm going to cheat a little bit and add some yellow to warm it up a little bit so it looks more like a kind of a primary red. So I'm still going to use some yellow in there. But to make, you know, to make red, of course, you can't, there's no other, you can't add like some other colors together to get red. You have to start with some kind of a red. Like green, you don't have to start with a green. You can make a green from a yellow and a blue, and that's why it's called a secondary color. But red is a primary color. You got to have red to make red. We're just warming this red up a little bit so it looks um, more convincing as a, yeah, so this will be our spectrum red, adding a little bit more yellow to it. There, it's looking good. And I want it, you know, I got to keep these gradation, you know, this, and this, and this, they all have to look a little bit different. I can adjust them if I want later to make them more consistent with one another. But for now, I'm satisfied. If I were doing this demonstration live, I probably wouldn't be spending as much time on it because uh, just just keeping in mind that you guys need to get to work. But since I'm just here, I'm gonna do it right. Um, and knowing that you can fast forward the video if you need to. you can you can go to the end, you can go back to the beginning, you can, you know, focus on whatever part is helpful. Okay, so if you're wanting to make pink, you just take a red and then you thin the red out with water. You want to make a warm pink, then you used to use a warmer red. If you want to make a cool pink, you use more of a violet red. Color temperature is something that we'll talk about in more in depth too later. In a very general sense, you know, this is the warm part of the color spectrum, the reds and yellows and oranges. Okay, let's get a little more saturation in here. Because of the paper's warping a little bit due to the wetness, then the pigment tends to settle. So that's okay if it does that. Don't feel like you have to engineer it to make it not do that. I have my borders taped. Basically, I have the paper taped onto the pad. That will help it maybe dry a little bit flatter when it all does dry. But that's something you could, you know, you can do if you want to minimize the paper warping. It still warps while you're working on it, but it tends to dry flatter if you tape the edges. And ultimately, we will talk about paper stretching too, but no need to do any paper stretching with these initial kinds of lessons. Okay, so saturated red to desaturated red. All right. Now I need to make a red violet. So this is kind of a crucial part. I don't want to have any yellow in there, no yellow. So I want to really, really clean my brush well. I don't think I need to clean to change my water yet. So I'm just going to go to red violet. And then it's going to be this red, which is already kind of a red violet. And it, you know, I know it will be contrasting with that with the spectrum red that I just made, but I'm just going to add a tad of blue to it just to sort of help it begin to turn the corner. So it should really still look red though, just, be like a really, really warm, warm purple color. Okay, we'll try that. So this will be my red violet. Looks pretty good. And it does look distinctly different than the color next to it. This would be a lot more fulfilling when you make your way all the way around the circle. So there are a couple reasons why if you're trying to make purples that they come out looking brown. One reason would be that you started with a red that just had kind of yellow orange in it already. Like you started with a red orange. If you started with a red that had that in there, it's going to make your color look brown no matter what type of blue you put with it. So because I started with a red that had a violet aspect to it, then I can usually get a better purple out of that. But we're still in red violet. Can't get ahead of ourselves. And I've done this like a million times, and so don't be intimidated if it seems like, if you're having a harder time doing it, well, of course you would because it might be the first time you've done this. And even when I do it a million times, I'm never perfect. I can't ever get it exactly right every time. So it is starting to kind of, be more gratifying anyway when the pieces start to fill in. Gonna go back and get just a little more saturation up here. Just I want it to be transparent, but as saturated as it can get before it becomes opaque. And remember, the water, you always want to keep it somewhat fluid. You want it to sort of puddle. You're like manipulating a puddle of water, colored water. I'm just kind of pulling some of that color down again to the lighter area. I'm not satisfied quite yet with the level of saturation here. Okay, well, that's good enough for now. I may have to come back. All right, so now I'm going to do, this is red violet, so I'm going to do violet. So that would be a secondary color, the mixture of blue and red together. And so violet can't look red and it can't look blue. It's got to be its own thing. And that's what I'm going on. So I'm trying to mix something that's not red or blue, but right in the middle. Try this out. That's my violet. I think that's going to be all right. Kind of running out of red paint. Before I go into the blues and greens, I'm going to change my water. So, because it's got too much kind of red, orange in it now. It's not gonna, it's not gonna, gonna make the other colors look muddy if I don't change the water. Another thing you could do is have two containers of water, and then with the two containers of water, you can have like a dirty water and a cleaner water. And eventually they both get dirty, but something to start with anyway. So desaturating my color. There we go. And trying to kind of pull the kind of more saturated purple back up here. And then leave the lighter color down here in the middle. And I am wetting my brush and then just pulling a little color out of there. And even maybe a little more color. And I can do this a while before, a little while anyway, before the paper starts to break down. There, I'm happy with that one. Okay, I'm going to pause the video a moment and change my water. Okay, back with fresh water and going to keep going. I should have waited until I did blue violet. I forgot about blue violet. So I'm keeping the same, kind of mixtures going here. I'm just adding more blue to my red violet that I had mixed up. And this is my blue violet. The blue violet is probably going to be the darkest color on your color wheel. It just tends to read in its fullest saturation anyway. It tends to read as the darkest color in the spectrum, typically. So I'm laying this on, and I know that I'm going to have to go back and get it more saturated. Less saturated here. So I'm going to pull that color away while it's still a little wet. And then I tend to get sloppier as I go because for speed's sake, I feel like I'm taking too long. So then I start cutting corners. All right, so here's my blue violet. I want to get some more saturated pigment up here. That's much better. Pretty much everyone knows at this point about Bob Ross, who's been dead for many years, but he's an international phenom in terms of his television painting show, and where you learn how to you can do like a mountain in a cabin, or lake in a cabin, or a little prairie in a cabin, or a cabin next to a tree, something to that effect. His thing is Hudson River School. That's kind of his point of inspiration, which was a 19th century tradition, very beautiful bucolic landscapes. Anyway, it is said that the majority of the people who watched the show religiously, surveyed, said that they didn't necessarily watch it um, to learn how to paint, but they watched it to be relaxed and to fall asleep by. So as I sit here painting, I'm thinking, yeah, I could fall asleep listening to me talk. So that may be the case with you guys. There. So that's my blue violet. I had it pretty good down here, and now I want to lift up a little. There. There. Okay. Nice and saturated down there. as the colors dry, you can really see, you know, what's happening here. I might have to go back over. I think I want to saturate this red-orange a little bit more, but I'm pretty satisfied. Okay, should have cleaned my water after. Should have changed my water after the violets. I should have changed it now, but it's not too bad. So I'm just going to go into the blues, and with the blue, just doing this like straight blue, because this is like right out of the tube. It's going to be like too intense for the other colors. So I'm trying to think how to just mute it a little bit. I'm going to add, okay, a little glitch there. My camera shut off, so I'm back. So I'm mixing a blue, and I don't want to, you know, it's the only, it's like super pure blue next to the other colors because I've been mixing. So just to kind of make it, you know, not stand out too much, I'll add just a tad of yellow and a tad of like, you know, this red violet color. It'll just sort of dull it ever so slightly so that it won't stand out too much. Okay. And here's the blue. It's nice to be turning the corner. Blue, especially the more aqua blue type colors. Yeah, I feel like I want to put a little like, I put a little purple in there because it was too aqua. It's already kind of an aqua blue, so I decided I want a little purple in there. So I, just to influence a little bit, there. Feels better, feels more, um, feels just more as part of the transition, more correct as part of the transition. So anyway, blue tends to be a very stainy color. You know, some colors you can lift up quite easily. Blues tend to not lift up very easily, except for ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue lifts up pretty easily. Say if it were dry, it's easy to pick it up. This blue does not. Painting left-handed now. I'm a right-handed person and I'm painting left-handed just because of the need to get at it at a certain angle. There. That's not bad. I urge you all to fast forward and move ahead to wherever you need. You know, you don't need to watch every one of these things, but I'm doing it anyway. Okay, there's my blue. Now I want to do blue-green. So I want to make sure that I have no, I don't want any purple in there. So just get a kind of fresh batch of blue. Oh, I hadn't even used the other blue down there. Okay, and then I want some yellow. We're trying to keep the red out of it. And now I just want it to really turn the corner towards looking kind of aqua. There. Now it's looking kind of aqua. Maybe even more yellow. There. Now I've got a nice aqua color going. I just allowed the two colors to touch. So I let the blue touch the blue green, and now they're bleeding together. So I gotta start over. Not really, but um, not much will happen, but I can always kind of fix it later. All right, so painting the last little bit in with just a clean brush and then letting it kind of touch the actual colored paint. And then pushing the colored paint kind of up away from that tinted area. And then I'm going to go back and add a little more pigment up here. Just to make it more saturated. Great. Okay, so I've got blue-green with a little blue bleeding into it. Now I want to make green, which is another secondary color. Blue-green is a tertiary color. So now I'm going to take yellow, being careful not to get any red in there. And then letting so now it can't look blue at all. It can only look green, can't look yellow. So this is my approximation of something that looks neither blue nor yellow, just looks green. And I'm almost about ready to complete the spectrum. When I do this exercise live, I don't think I take nearly so much time. And care. If you use your finger to kind of steady your hand, be sure that it's not wet with color on it. Like, I just noticed that I made a drip. There, that won't hurt. Okay, so with my green, I need to just saturate it more. So just mixing up more in the palette just to get that nice, rich, saturated color. And I'm just going to lay it in there. And then draw it down a little bit. With the result being a nice, beautiful, just kind of like transparent color, puddle of like super saturated paint there. Okay, good. Finally, yellow-green, tertiary color, a mixture between a primary and a secondary color. And so I get yellow, and it's mostly yellow. And then it should just be kind of bridging finally bridging the spectrum so that it's found its way back to the color that we started with. So it should be very close to that. It'll be a lot lighter. little area where I got some blue paint on that is showing through, but not too badly. And then finally just coming back to saturate that yellow green a little bit more here. And then trying to pull it back down so it's somewhat graduated. There. And now when I'm done, if I feel like I want to kind of go back and glaze over some areas that maybe were not saturated enough, I can do that. My red-orange isn't like perfect, although it's still drying, so I might go back and do that, but I'm relatively happy with that. So next we're gonna move on to mixing the color complements. Okay, now we're gonna take the color spectrum and basically divide it in half. So we'll take kind of the cooler side of the color spectrum and line it up here. So we're just basically putting this into a grid. Line it up here, and then the warmer side of the spectrum, we're going to line it up here. So, and then we're going to mix them with their opposites. So for instance, we're going to take yellow and mix it with violet. We're going to take red and mix it with green. We're going to take blue and mix it with orange. And then, so working this way, so if this is, see, following this kind of thing, if this is yellow here, then this is going to be purple here. So it's just basically always going opposite. So let's just try that. Yellow, green to red, violet, green to red, blue, green to red, orange, blue to orange, blue, violet to yellow, orange, violet to yellow. And I think that's what that completes the spectrum. Oh, notice in the end, when you get done with this color wheel, you just want this kind of bleaching effect in the middle. And then you just want this sense of kind of an even graduation of colors. And then, with their kind of maximum saturation here on the end. Try to always maintain that sense of transparency. And when the paint does this kind of crystallization thing, that's okay. That's just part of the watercolor process. Don't feel like you did it wrong. That's cool. The cool watercolor painters know that that's cool. Okay, right. So now let's start with yellow and violet. What I did, I added, I already have kind of like a spectrum going here on the palette. I added more of each color there just to kind of enable myself to keep them somewhat clean. So now I'm going to try to mix yellow with purple to make neutral tones. Now neutral tones are what are known as the earth colors. You can buy earth colors on the palette. They're over here like umber and sienna, but it's also nice to be able to kind of neutralize, mix them, kind of see how you can create these colors. But they tend to go towards gray. Like when we're done with this column in the middle will pretty much be gray, neither identifiable as one or the other. But once you get away from the spectrum colors into the earthy colors, then there are a few more options you have in terms of getting there. But just we just want to look and see what happens here. So, going to start with this yellow. And then I'm just going to put it basically all the way across. And as I add the color, each subsequent unit, square unit I add the color to, well, it's going to be kind of less saturated. And then finally here, not much yellow at all. And I'm going to kind of just go back. I'm going to go back, going to kind of just keep going back and back. You'll see in a moment. So now I'm going to get my purple. And I want to get a pure purple. So I believe here's my violet on, I have a little bit left already. Trying to match it with this color over here. Yeah, okay. So here's my purple violet. And so I've got the purple here, just same, maybe a little more. Looks like my purple has had more red in it. Okay, there. Okay, so now I want to add, this should get progressively more, go towards yellow, this should go towards purple. But what you're doing each time is you're kind of neutralizing, and you're trying to get this middle unit to become sort of gray, somewhat gray, or gray-like anyway. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking the purple and I'm just making it more earthy. And you can cheat in this process by kind of adding whatever color you need from the spectrum to make it go towards gray. I want to bring a little bit of purple over here. So this yellow should be kind of like, end up being kind of like a mustard yellow. Add a little purple of that. It should still look yellow. There. Almost too much purple in it. And continuing to add more yellow to this. There, that's looking good. These you want to try to keep these saturated too. Keep these colors saturated. And just keep adding, one to the other until you get it kind of right. That's looking good. Definitely still in the yellow spectrum. This is still in a purple spectrum, and I'm going to add a little more yellow to it. There. So you can see how they're neutralizing a little bit towards neutral. So here, I just want this to be gray. So I'm sensing it's a little too red right now, so I can cheat a little bit and add more blue just to kind of counterbalance it. There. Yeah, like if it comes out to kind of like a warm gray. And they're kind of cool. It's sort of like in the painting process, you end up discovering, oh yeah, like, as I'm making a color, it's got these interesting sort of like, you can see when a color is made out of multiple colors because it'll manifest in a little bit around the edges where you're kind of layering or whatever. So it kind of is more interesting than if you just had it out of the tube. So you can see this is different, this is different. I allowed the paints to touch, the wetness to touch a little bit. So it's kind of, they're bleeding into one another, but I can go back and kind of work on that. I want this one to look a little bit more yellow. It was getting kind of too brown too quickly. Yeah, that's a little bit better. And that looks pretty good. Maybe it could be more saturated. There. There, that's good. Now, as you fill in this block, it'll start making more sense. It's kind of cool. As they start to dry, and there'll be a pattern that emerges, which is very beautiful. All right, so the next one is yellow orange. So now I'm kind of on my palette. I'm just trying to find a clean area where I can mix again. Here's my yellow orange. Unless I want to start over, which one could. I'm just trying to use everything that's on my palette. Or you might move on to another mixing surface too. That's always a possibility because, you know, my paints are getting, it's harder to find an area that has a clean area to, or a clean patch of paint to work from, especially when you start kind of mixing opposites in there. Okay, so that's my yellow orange, and then over here, and I'm just, since it's on my brush, I'm just going to continue using it. And I'm going to do just 2 of these, and then jump to the end of the demo after I finish this one. Just want you to see how I do a couple. Okay, so now I have yellow orange, which is here, and then I want to do blue violet, mix it with blue violet. So I go back over here to, going to make some more blue violet, which is mostly blue, a little red. There, blue violet. Like I said, is probably the darkest color on the spectrum. Okay, there's my blue violet. And then I'm going to add it to this yellow orange, which is going to make it more neutralized, more earthy. Dead. So I've been out on a run. I'm back, and I have finished up the rest of the complementary mixtures. So I went all the way down the spectrum, mixing violet with yellow, blue violet with yellow orange, blue with orange, blue green with red orange, green with red, and yellow green with red violet. And then, so then it kind of fills in a block. You can see in this column is still the original color, but it's just muted down. It's kind of more earthy. These are really important colors to work with when you're painting. Not everything can be like rainbow colors. Just doesn't work, doesn't look good. It doesn't work that way. So then you can adjust them when you're done just to kind of make everything fit. Like this one seems sort of off. And so I'm going to take a little green glaze. And you can see the palette gets kind of, starts to get pretty crazy. I don't even know if I can find yellow-green anymore. I'm just going to go out of my palette here, get some yellow, and find some blue over there. Oh, actually green. I need to make a green. Here's some blue. Make a green. That's a blue-green. I need more yellow. I'll clean the palette out later. There's yellow-green. And I mean a regular green. And then I'm just going to glaze over that. And then as soon as that dries, it'll sort of mellow, and then it'll have the appropriate sort of range as the others. So this is the brightest version, this is a more dull, earthy version, and so on. Okay, one final thing to do, which is a value scale. So with that, you can take all of these colors you've been working with and mix them together into mud. I mean, whatever color is dominating, or whatever color there's the most of course, will determine the color that you end up with. So it's kind of going to be a neutralized blue-green. I want something more gray, so I'm going to add back in some tiny bit of red. Paint goes a long way, so don't worry about using it. There's a little yellow. So there, I'm going to mix them together to get something a little more blue, still dominating. Blue is a powerful color. Okay, I want to do a value scale just using this kind of murky blue. And then this should be fast and easy. So you get the darkest aspect of it on this end. And this is basically what you did with the, when you were doing the portrait of an object or human being. Just utilize this range of values, and the more you're able to differentiate the values, the more that value scale that you used, then probably the more success you had in getting a satisfying image. So this is going to try to make this one as dark as I possibly can, and then mix it with a little water here so it'll be lighter. Having trouble with my headset there. A little bit lighter by diluting it with water. Lighter yet. And I can always rob from one to add to the other. I'm going to go back and kind of engineer these some more. Sometimes you can't quite tell what's going on. So I'm robbing from this one to add a little to this one. And these two seem kind of indistinguishable, so maybe I'll make this a little darker. Whoops, got myself into trouble. Just have to leave that alone. So I need two more gradations here. And the last one should be like super, super pale. So obviously you can do a value scale with virtually any color Blue is just super strong. You can do value scale with almost any color, but this should be this final one should be kind of the equivalent of very pale gray. Anyway, if you did a value scale with yellow, of course, you wouldn't have much range. If you did it with a blue or something on the darker end of the spectrum, then of course you get some real difference. So I'm robbing from this one to add to this one. Oh, I touched it. And then this one, I think I'm in a little trouble here. So I'm going to maybe take a little bit away from this one. I'm in trouble generally because I let them touch and they're just kind of freely flowing together. I'll have to wait for them to dry. So what you're after ultimately is just a distinct gradation going from the very, very dark blue, neutralized blue to something that approximates pale, pale, pale gray. So I'll just have to see what happens when these dry, and then I'll go back and adjust them a little bit. Okay, so this is what we're going to be working on. It's a one-session exercise. You should have enough time to do it if you've kind of reviewed the demonstration. You just kind of sit down and you should be able to take care of it in a couple hours, and then you'll be expert at mixing color. Any kind of color you want is a derivation of this sort of process. Like this represent the spectrum, and there are thousands of hues that are kind of in between these, but this is how you can get what you need in terms of color. And one final thing I suppose I should say is that you're primarily working kind of like with a few kind of more bright spectrum colors, and then often the bulk of your painting is kind of happening in this range with once in a while like a brighter color. And I think that's just something important to remember. The other thing, I guess, one final point is that when you're making a painting, if you want, say, a color to maintain its intensity, say you really run an intense yellow, but it's got to be darker, well, then you just kind of go this way. If you want a color that is a yellow, say, that is duller and darker, then you go this way, you go opposite. And then if you want a yellow that's really pale or pastel-y, but still very, very yellow, then you just thin it out with water and then you do that. And that's true of every single color. So there's kind of three different ways you can manipulate a color: by thinning it, by adding its adjacent color to it to darken it, or perhaps lighten it but maintain its intensity, and then neutralizing it by adding its opposite. Okay. And here's a slightly more up-close view of the final product. So that's what you should be striving for in your in your work session, is just to see if you can put this together. And it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to give you, an idea about how to go about the process. And then I'll be available in class to be able to talk you through some problems if you're encountering, not being able to get the right tones or whatever. Okay. Lesson complete.